Well, it's the New South Wales election coming up, state election coming up very soon. And in a shock move last month, the ex-Labor MP, Tanya Mihailuk, jumped ship to One Nation, led by Mark Latham, who also similarly jumped from the Labor leadership many years ago into One Nation. Tanya said that the Labor Party is just too woke and praised One Nation for its capacity to stand up for the issues that really matter. I'm pleased to say Tanya joins us now in the studio this morning. Great to see you, Tanya.
Thank you.
So, first of all, fascinating, why did you jump and why did you jump to One Nation?
Well, look, it's been a long time coming for me with the Labor Party. I was in the party for 27 years. I know people get less for murder, but I joined at a time when Paul Keating was Prime Minister and he was my local member, and you might recall it was an era where people focused on real policy issues, industrial relations, floating a dollar, the economy. You could really determine the differences between the parties based on their policy positions, and the Labor Party was a very traditional working class party back then. But it's just changed completely, particularly in the last 5 or 10 years. For me personally, when I was a shadow minister, I just struggled. I was often the lone voice when it came to having social and economic conservative views. I think the party is now, the Labor Party, particularly in New South Wales, is dominated by socialist and left-wing ideologues that are at complete odds with the values that are being espoused by families and communities of Western Sydney. And the communities in Western Sydney can't relate anymore to the Labor Party of today. The biggest concern I have is that if the polls are correct, we're going to see a Labor Party form a coalition with the Greens and some rogue independents come March 25th, and they will unleash a war chest of agendas, fads and policies that will make the Victorian Labor government look conservative.
Rita.
Dear me, that's a warning right there.
That's a warning right there, that's right.
Now, there was some internal polling leaked from the Liberals saying that One Nation stands to win 5 seats in that Western Sydney area. Is that something that you have expectations of? That would be quite a coup.
Here's one of them.
Well, I've got to say, I've had a terrific positive reaction everywhere I go out in Western Sydney and in the regions as well. I've also travelled out to Hunter and Port Stephens. And I have found that people are coming up to me saying they are giving up on the major political parties and they're looking to One Nation for a mainstream party that's prepared to actually fight for common sense values.
Well, Tanya, this brings me to my next question here, which is, you said you were the only one in shadow cabinet with socially conservative views. I note that you didn't go to the Liberals. Now, tell me, would you say that, the Liberals, and particularly its moderate wing, would be not really an amenable home for somebody with socially conservative values? Is that why you jumped ship to One Nation? Is there the same issue there as in Labor?
Well, I think the Liberals are dealing with issues with what the Labor Party. So 5 or 10 years ago, the Labor Party already gave up on any kind of position of conservatism. Let's be clear about that. The Libs are now at a crossroads, clearly. You've got Dom Perrottet, who is a socially conservative, but he's dominated by people like Matt Keane. And that's a problem for the Liberal Party. And I do hear people raise with me that the concern is that both major political parties are just trying to outgreen the Greens now. So you've got people out there in the suburbs that are looking for an alternative mainstream party, and I've had terrific feedback from many telling me they do want to vote for One Nation for the first time.
So, Tanya, Mark Latham, who was originally set up this show, so you're in a great seat being here in the studio. Mark Latham has done an amazing job in this last term of the New South Wales Parliament, focusing on particularly the sorts of issues we were talking about earlier in the show to do with kids and education, the whole gender fluidity business, but also the indoctrination of kids on so many hard left issues. How effective has Mark been, in your opinion? What impressed you about him, I guess?
I think he's been incredibly effective when it comes to pushing parental rights, religious freedom rights as well. I got to know Mark when I was on that inquiry with him, which was set up, the Religious Freedom Inquiry, which was set up on the back of him proposing, and One Nation proposing legislation in New South Wales. And I found that he has reached out to many community groups, to stakeholders. He speaks to parents and families. He understands the issues that are really concerning people. And there's no doubt that we've got a problem here in New South Wales, as we do across the nation, when it comes to the fundamentals of education aren't being taught at school. And we know that we have a problem where teachers are trying to be politicians in the school classroom, which is wrong. And I think he has exposed that really well. Mark Latham has definitely exposed that, and One Nation, and has really brought attention to this left-wing indoctrination that really is a serious problem and will continue to be a problem if it's not going to be addressed. So,
Rita?
You talked about how Labor has lost touch with working class Australians and those values, but I wonder if it's even bigger than that, because we've got the inner city very well represented by both Labor, Liberal, the Teals, the Greens, but the suburbs, the working class, the aspirational Australians, the middle class, who's really representing them and their values, and the immigrant community in particular? I've seen no effort really from the Liberals, the Coalition, to reach out to these people who are, well, feel like Labor's left them behind.
No, well, you're right, Rita. I've seen it firsthand. I think I've looked at my communities out in southwest Sydney. They're very strong in faith. My electorate of Bankstown is more than 84 or 85% of people identify with the faith, and yet they can't relate to either of the major political parties, who aren't even prepared to push religious freedom values or indeed any of the values that matter for these communities. So I think you're going to see over time, and this election will be critical, where people will make a decision that they are tired of the major political parties. They're not representing the values that their communities espouse, and they're not relatable to, they can't relate to these parties. And I think this is a problem that the Labor Party and the Liberal Party are both going to have to deal with, where I think these communities of faith and multicultural communities are going to wake up and realise these parties are taking them for granted.
But in this election, aren't we just fracturing the vote with the minor parties? Because at the end of the day, the left has very good preference discipline.
Yes.
The Greens' preferences go to Labor, gets them elected. But the One Nation preferences, they don't have that discipline going to the Coalition. So is the end result going to be more far-left government as opposed to giving a voice to those voiceless people?
Well, I think that, look, the Greens will be elected in a number of seats in their own right, and they're a threat to the Labor Party in a number of seats. And you can see now with the Labor Party, they're sort of trying to outgreen the Greens. So the Greens announce a policy, 24 hours later the Labor Party announces the same policy. So I think One Nation, we're not there to elect the Coalition or the Labor government. The One Nation Party is about giving people a choice for a mainstream party that's actually going to put common sense values and policies front and centre in this campaign and in the lead up to the next 4 years. I think Mark and Rod have done a great job already in the last 4 years, pushing the issues that matter for these communities. And not just on education and in parental rights, but in the energy space as well, in pushing for the natural resources industry to be supported in New South Wales. And I think that we'll see a result where people will actually, there will be a protest vote. I think there'll be people tired of both political major parties, tired of them chasing the green and left-wing vote and the woke agenda that's in complete contrast to their own values.